Welcome to Mr. Truth, where we take real studies from real scientists and we discuss the statistics behind the social trends and what drives our behavior. Mr. Truth, where we ask questions everyone wants to ask and we give answers nobody wants to hear. Mr. Truth. Introduce yourself.
I'm Silvia, aka Crypto Empress. I'm a professional dancer, living the crypto lifestyle, and also a hobby model.
What is a
and
crypto?
A mom.
What's a crypto lifestyle? What does that mean?
Well, that means like for the past 6 years, like everything I do like job-wise has been like regarding crypto, and like I do different crypto projects, being an advisor there, and kind of like, I just really love crypto. So
Why? What is it about crypto that you're like, I gotta get into crypto?
I think like mostly, I think it's like the hope for like better future, because I'm not really a fan of, government controlling our money, and there's some random middleman between there, and, also like all these like politicians that are being so corrupted, and like we don't really see how the money that they're like exchanging or sending, or even for donation, like people that are donating, we don't see the money movement.
So how does crypto solve that problem?
Well, for example, if I could see like, we had this like huge issue here in Estonia with this Slava Ukraini thing, where they kind of like smuggled money and did some shady things with it. And people donated, like Estonia is one of the top contributors to helping Ukraine, right? And then like a year later, it turned out like the lady who was like in front of it, like actually like put most of the money in her pocket and all that.
So in one way, she was saving Ukraine.
You could say that, yeah. But if we, for example, would have seen those transactions like on blockchain and where the money exactly goes, then like issue like that or corruption overall would be like, I don't know if eliminated overall, but
Right.
it would get better.
Well, let me ask you this. So, but isn't that the same argument for the CBDC?
Yes, but I think like there's two directions. Okay, probably more, but like with those CBDCs, like the future is either is going to be full that and government controlled and our move controlled, or we can have like more free world and where like you can still have like a bit of anonymity.
Anonymity, sure. Okay,
Right.
but if the blockchain is showing where every dollar being spent and being used is going, and if you're saying like, well, we can use that transaction history of the blockchain to end corruption, well, then who's overseeing that to determine what is corruption, where money wouldn't that be government?
Yeah, I get your point, but that's what I'm thinking. Like, I don't really know, like, what's the form in the future going to be, like, who exactly oversees what, but like, I think like in some shape or form, like blockchain technology implementation could like make things better.
What you want is a freer world. You said, look, I don't like the government control, and so to me, crypto represents a freer world. But then what you did is you went ahead and described the situation where crypto would be used to hunt down on corruption, which is good, but somebody has to make a decision what corruption is and oversee it and create rules around it. So it sounds like regulation of crypto just brings us to a sort of a CBDC type of outcome. What's the difference?
Good question. I don't know. I think like
I'll tell you what the difference is. There's going to be two specific differences between Bitcoin and CBDC, okay? In my opinion. Number one, the anonymity of the spender is very important because in CBDC you have no anonymity anymore. And so, for example, if Silvia goes out and buys meat, then the app says you bought meat and you've contributed this much to GMO, and now you can't buy meat anymore. So there's some centralized system that not only knows what you're buying, but can set limits on what you can spend your money on. So it turns money into basically coupons. Mm-hmm. And living in Estonia, former Soviet state, people here know what coupons are like, and we don't want frickin' coupons, right? That's number one. Number two, Bitcoin is cross-border, mm-hmm. right? Whereas CBDC would be controlled by a singular entity, Bitcoin or another crypto type of a currency like Bitcoin probably being the big one, it's cross-border. So there's no centralized control system for it that we know of. And that's kind of what the idea of freedom is, right? Because what we don't want is we don't want the government, whomever they may be, to control our spending of money on things they deem to be good that we may not deem to be so good, right? Because as Thomas Sowell, the philosopher, says, the question is not what is the right decision. The question is who gets to decide what's the right decision. It's like not what's right. Who gets to decide what's right? And I'm a big free market capitalist. I think people should be able to spend their money on whatever the hell they want, and the market should decide the winner.
You said it very well.
Let me say it like this. Okay, so like let me ask you a question. Like, why should people know about Bitcoin? Why should people know about Ethereum? What's the benefit and what's the advantage of knowing about it?
I think it kind of gives you an opportunity to have more control over your own money, but also like, how to say, crypto and like overall like learning about Bitcoin and Ethereum and stuff like that has really taught me like financial education or like, stuff like that about money that we don't specifically like see in school that much.
Well, can you tell me an example of that? Like, what is it about money that once you got into Bitcoin, you're like, that other thing's a little bit corrupt and people should know about it?
Well, for example, like I didn't know about how the like Federal Reserve works, kind of, or how they're like printing all this money and kind of like printing it more and more and more to solve every problem that they have, and like overall like that part, I think, and like the way the money moves, and like why do we even have to have like banks in between? Like for example, like Swedbank having like maintenance fee on my card. Like why they're not like coming to clean my card every month, but I'm still paying for it.
So why do they have a maintenance fee? Why is there a middleman?
Why is there a middleman?
Sure.
I think it's maybe because of the system, so that the people in the top who have more power over decisions, they get to become richer.
How so? Explain to me how the Federal Reserve works.
Oh my God, you're putting me on a spot here.
Do your best. Do your best. I'm an uneducated consumer, and I need to understand why some people say the Federal Reserve is not a good thing.
Well, because they're like scamming with money.
How so?
Because they're like printing it out of thin air, and then like there's this whole like, well, not in only Federal Reserve, like banks overall, like then they take people's money and they kind of lend out what they don't have, and so on. So the whole like, how can you lend out like money that you don't actually have?
So a problem you have is fractional banking, is what you're describing. One of the issues I have is, for example, we had this idea, like Celsius Network came out a couple of years ago, right, with Alex Mashinsky running the whole thing, and he was saying that like you can unbank yourself and you can give us money and then we're going to make you money, by staking your crypto. And what it turned out is he was actually lending money he didn't have. Because once the contracts came due and the price of crypto crashed, he couldn't pay back the people that gave that were investing in his company. So it seems to me like the entire crypto industry, and we saw the same thing with FTX, they were writing checks they couldn't cash either. So it seems like the crypto industry has kind of mimicked the Federal Reserve, but it did it with no regulations and no governmental support, and then the whole thing damn collapsed. So again, I ask the question, like, how will crypto be different?
Well, I think maybe then the privacy or like anonymity part.
Okay. So the anonymity part of crypto is what appeals to me. I like the idea of being able to spend money the government doesn't see. Why do I like that idea? Because it takes a control away from them. And you might say, well, that's a little bit of like a vindictive argument. It's 100% vindictive. I don't want the government to see what I'm spending my money on. I don't want some old dude, some set of bureaucrats or some people that I don't know and I don't care about looking into my personal affairs, regardless of whatever the hell I'm doing. And I don't conduct any nefarious affairs. I just don't want people looking into my private life. You know what I mean? It's like the autonomy that I have over my body. I'll give you that example. Like the autonomy I have over my body, like when I go to a doctor, I choose when to go to the doctor. It's my choice. There's no government-mandated health inspector that shows up at my house every day and puts a probe up my butt. It doesn't exist. And if and when it would exist, they'd say, well, we're doing it for you. I'd be like, no, stay the hell out of my body, man. It's my body, right? And that's the way that I look at my financial affairs. That's the way that I look at my spending habits. Like, it's my autonomy to do what I choose to do with my hard-earned money. It's as long as I'm conducting things that are that have, let's say, what's the word I'm looking for here? Consent amongst all parties participating, the government should not be part of that transaction. And that's what, to me, crypto represents, is the freedom from government getting involved and showing up for unauthorized anal probes.
Okay, but how do you then feel about like they're now like implementing the regulations about like if a person like sends, I don't know, I think it was maybe like $1,000.
It's like 1,000 euros or something, yeah.
And then they have to report it to the regulators or the government or whatever. Like, how do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, it's clear, the idea that I have to report any spending on crypto of 1,000 euros or more is clearly evil. Like, it's clearly evil. It's like, why? Why would I have to report that? Like, imagine that it's not Bitcoin. Imagine that I'm trading in barter. Like, and I'm just trading 5 chairs for a table. And the government's like, well, anything that you trade that's more than 5 chairs, you have to report to us. I mean, crypto is effectively just like an asset class. It's like, it's a bartering tool. It doesn't have any inherent value. It's just a barter tool. So it's like, why do I have to report my barter to the government? Like, that's a legitimate question. Why?
Well, they say that because, you know, it's for the safety and, you know, maybe like somebody's using this money for terrorism or something like that.
You know, it's
so it's for your own safety.
It's interesting to me. They say that you're using the money for terrorism. Let me define one way that I would look at terrorism, right? Somebody holds me hostage against my will, restricting my freedom of movement. And if I don't comply to their ideological restriction of movement and I speak out against it, they castigate me from society and take away my ability to have independent free will. That sounds a lot like COVID restrictions. You know, it's like you have to stay home and you can't go outside and you can't see your family and you can't have your friends over. Oh, and there are people watching you that if you do it, they will report you, and you can't travel, and if you speak out against it, you're gonna be evil, right? And we're gonna not let you eat at restaurants or go to work. And I'm like, okay, so we're using these new crypto laws to prevent terrorism. Who's the terrorist? You know what I mean? Like, I've never spent money with somebody that was like, hey, you can't leave your house for 2 years, man.
Yeah.
That sounds like freaking ISIS to me, doesn't it? Oh, and by the way, they'll publicly shame you if they don't agree with you, and they'll cancel you, and they'll destroy your reputation. So it's like, you know, I feel like, you know, if you're putting out a government mandate that you have to spend this amount of whatever asset and then you have to report it to us, I'm like, why do I have to report it to you? Who are you? Well, you might be using it for nefarious purposes, like what you did to me.
But they also like, okay, one is terrorism, but they also say, you know, it's to fight against anti-money laundering. That's what they.
Yeah, let's talk about money laundering for a second, right? Like, again, I'll use the Canadian government as an example, right? The Canadian government ordered enough vaccines during the pandemic to vaccinate every single human in Canada 14 times.
Wow.
Keep in mind, to vaccinate 14 times, this is when they're saying you need 2 shots and you're done, but they buy enough vaccines to vaccinate everybody 14 times. They also buy a vaccine manufacturing company, which goes bankrupt in about a day. And then what percentage of vaccines that the Canadian government bought ended up being completely destroyed because it was never used? 55%. 55% of the vaccines they bought were never used, and they destroyed them. But somebody had to pay somebody else for those vaccines, right? So they took the taxpayers' money and they gave it to a company for 14 shots, which nobody said they're going to need, and then half of those get thrown away, but the money doesn't get returned. So where's the money go? Where's the money go? That sounds a lot like laundering to me, doesn't it? Let's look at the EU Commission. We have the same thing in the EU Commission, where it's now coming out that, like, there were secret text messages between Pfizer and Ursula von whatever, who runs the EU Commission. It's like secret text messages that are not being revealed, and they're trying to hide and obfuscate between ordering Pfizer vaccines for Europe. Why isn't this public information? Why is it being hidden? Where'd that money go and who kept it? That's when I see, like, you know, if my company buys a product, right, and we buy so much of it that we know we'll never use it, and we throw half of it away a year later. I'm going, who the hell in my company is cutting a deal with the other side and taking a kickback from it? Now, you don't think there were kickbacks being made from these contracts? So again, it's like, well, we have to protect anti-money laundering. it sounds to me like when you circumvent basic human right charter freedoms across all countries, as all governments did, that sounds like a crime to me. And then, oh, by the way, in Canada, the politicians gave themselves a raise during the pandemic. Now, my business couldn't operate for 2 years, but we're working hard, so we get a raise. I'm working hard too, man. Give me a frickin' raise. No, they take my tax money and they pay themselves. So this idea that, you have to report a transaction to the government, blah, 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 it's like, it's an evil idea. It's an evil idea, and I don't believe that money laundering is the reason for it. I believe the reason for it is government doesn't want to lose control of the taxation, of the freedom of movement, and basically of the ability to paint anyone they want as a terrorist anytime they want, which is now we're seeing is exactly how governments undermine people like, Edward Snowden or Julian Assange, who are basically like news reporters for all means and purposes, revealing information about nefarious government dealings, and the people that they report on don't like them very much. So they say, oh, but now you're a criminal, whatever. So to me, I'm just not fucking complying with that. I'm not. I'm gonna transfer Bitcoin between my own accounts over and over and over and over. Arrest me for paying myself from my own money to my other bank account. Let's see what happens.
Bold for you to say it.
Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? Who gives a fuck? Why are governments coming out and like wanting to control people's lives? It's like, well, I know why. Because they're evil, I think. Anyways, coming back to you for a second. So, how are you involved in the crypto industry today?
I'm a bit less involved because I became a mom like 8 months ago, but I am just recently I was doing like YouTube educational videos about like basics and like how to cash out, how to install a MetaMask wallet and stuff like that.
Who watches those videos?
It was like for one company, so they had like target audience. But it was really interesting that like we kind of like finished season 1, or if you could say that. And throughout those 12 episodes, the cameraman was there always listening what I was speaking, right? And then like in the end, I was like, do you even understand like what I spoke here? Or like, do you understand now a bit more? And he's like, I still don't get it. And it's like, okay, but even though it was like, I think super simple and like basic and stuff, but yeah. So, but there was like target audience people in other countries.
Okay, and so I see right now that a lot of crypto is being consumed in sort of third world countries.
Yes.
Why?
I think because they have the most like problems with their government and their like currencies and all that. So people are looking for other options, a way out, kind of.
Yeah, it's interesting. I look at Argentina, where we used to have a small office there, and we couldn't maintain that office because inflationary cycles there are insane. So a client would put a deposit down for like a suit, and then 6 weeks later they came to pay the second half of the deposit, and the amount of money that they had to pay had changed so significantly that we had to make sure that our invoices were in USD. Oh. Because if we say it's like 10,000 pesos, whatever, and then they put down 5,000, the next month their 5,000 pesos is worth what 200 was worth the month before. And so we as a company were at huge risk of being underpaid, and so we had to put it in USD. And so I understood that there are a lot of places in the world where people can't trust their currency because it could crash, and then all your money's just disappeared magically, right? And we saw this, kind of inflation. Like, think pre-World War II Germany, right? Like, this was not a failed state. This was a struggling state, but it was still frickin' Germany. And, Germany is a first world country as they get. Even back then, the German standard of living was way ahead of Eastern Europe, like by a lot. And you would go to a restaurant in 37, 38, and you would have to basically pay for your meal in advance because the price would change so significantly from the time you start and finish your meal. That's the kind of inflation that people were faced with, right? Like, you couldn't even trust paying at the end of a meal for a restaurant because the restaurant would be like, no, that money will be worth less. And so inflation is basically robbing people of their money. Just like in Estonia, we've had 26% year-over-year inflation for 2 years, which puts us somewhere in the realm of Sudan. And that 26%, by the way, it's a lie. It's not actually 26%. Because
It's more?
It's way more, and I'll tell you why. I'm not just talking about how they measure it, and obviously how they measure it has a significant impact on it. It's the fact that it's the second time you get a 26% inflation, it's inflation over the 26% you had the first time. So the real inflation rate, so 2 years, so if I do 1.26 times 1.26, the real inflation rate is like 58%.
That's wild. I watched
Right, because it's 26% on top of the 26% that you had already.
I watch a lot of I don't know if you know Mark Moss videos.
No.
He's doing like very like good educational videos
Okay,
about
I'll look
the
him up.
financial system and the money and inflation as well. Like, well, he's American, so he a lot of times uses like American financial system, but he did explain the inflation like model kind of way, like what they're saying to you right now is not the actual percentage, that it's way worse. And then he kind of explained how and why and like.
Well, one
I
of the
was like,
reasons it's
wow.
way worse is one of the reasons inflation is way worse than people say it is because inflation is measured on a basket of goods like consumer goods, and so you have things like eggs in there, but you also have things like airline flights. And during COVID. So we're coming out of COVID, right? And things like eggs are costing way, way more. I think it's like $7 for like a dozen eggs in the States now. It's crazy. But flights were very, very cheap because nobody was still flying. And so that was counterbalancing the actual inflation of the consumer goods. The things that people were consuming cost so much more than the official inflation rate. And it's like, so if you have, $100,000 in your bank account and you're in Estonia and inflation is effectively, the effective inflation rate is 56% over 24 months. Your $100,000 is now buying 56% less goods. That is a tax of all taxes.
And I think like it hasn't even gone to the, it gets worse. I think I think next year it's going to be even.
Why do you think that inflation is going to go up next year?
I don't know. I just have a feeling like
not gonna buy
that overall, like something has to happen, like because like we're talking a lot about like the fourth industrial revolution and like everything's gonna go digital and blockchain and all that. But I kind of feel like in order for all of this new kind of system, whatever they're building, for it to happen, like first you have to tear kind of down the old thing.
So how are they going to tear down the old thing?
I don't know. It can be either war, it can be some sort of a pandemic, or, I think like in the end, well, like in the next few years, like, it's going to be the richer are going to get more rich and poor people more poor.
Do you think that's wrong that richer get rich and poor get poor? See, I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
I think it's like people need to be more educated on their own finances. And I think like that's kind of their goal, to kind of even like erase the middle class. So there's
no middle class. It's a lie. There's no middle class in anything. There's never been a middle class in anything. And
I can
elaborate on that very clearly. So here's a good clip for you, Henry, that you can put up. Here's how you destroy a female communist. Because a female communist comes in, she's like, we have a disparity in income between the rich and the poor under capitalism, and we need less. I'm like, okay, well, let's just look at what it means to have a disparity in income, right? So in the 40s, there's a Italian sociologist / economist / statistician. His last name was Gini, Gini, and he invented something called the Gini coefficient. Have you heard about this?
I'm not sure.
The Gini coefficient is a measure of the wealth disparity in any given country. So, for example, a Gini coefficient of 1 describes perfect imbalance. So one person has all the money, nobody else has money. And the Gini coefficient of 0 describes perfect equality amongst all, like perfect, let's say, communism. Okay? So you have this thing called a Gini coefficient. And so the US considers like 0.4 or something to be like a very high Gini coefficient, right? The Gini coefficient in crypto is about 0.8. So there's a very few amount of people in crypto that own like all the crypto. And you can rank Gini coefficient by country. So some countries have higher Gini coefficients, some countries have lower Gini coefficients, right? Now here's where it gets interesting. When the Gini coefficient is applied to the sexual marketplace, meaning the Gini coefficient applied to men who have sex versus men who don't have sex, the Gini coefficient in the sexual marketplace for men is higher than any country in the world. Meaning that very few men get to have all the sex and all the men get to have none of the sex. That's a statistical fact. Why am I bringing that up in this conversation, destroying a female communist? Well, it's like, okay, who decides if men have sex?
I don't know, women?
Of course women, right? Unless they're out there pillaging and raping. It's the women that decide if the men have sex. So the Gini coefficient in the sexual marketplace for men basically means that women are deciding what?
If the men can get laid or not.
Specifically, they're deciding which men get laid. So when I talk to a female communist, she's like, oh, we should have equality. I'm like, we have the greatest inequality of any marketplace in the sexual marketplace, the greatest. So why don't you female communists go out and give it out to every guy you don't want to fuck? Like, just give it up to every man to be equal and fair. So I don't want to do that. It's like, well, aren't you for equality? She's like, I'm for equality of money. I'm like, okay. So in a capitalist system, who makes all the consumer choices? Statistically, women make 80% of the consumer choices. Women make 80% of all consumer choices, right? And in capitalism, the money gets handed out to those that are selling their product, i.e. the buyers are buying their product. Who are the buyers?
Men.
No, it's the women. Women make 80% of consumer choices.
Okay.
Women make 80% of consumer choices. So the buyers in a capitalist system are overwhelmingly women. It's female driven. So when a female communist comes, she's like, well, it's inequality. It's like, okay, stop buying products you like and start buying products you hate. Like, hey, female communist on her Apple computer, buy an old 486 PC from the mid-90s. Why are you buying the nice stuff? Well, because I need it. It's like, well, then you're choosing to perpetuate capitalism, and then you're perpetuating inequality in all your choices. Women are the ones that perpetuate inequality, all the choices, right? Women make 80% of the consumer choices, right? In capitalism, we find and buy the best goods that we want and need. So women are the ones that are making the consumer choices to drive profits to Amazon, to drive profits to eBay. By the way, who's sitting buying products on Amazon and eBay? Is it men?
No.
It's freaking women. So women are causing the inequality in that, and women are causing the inequality in the sexual marketplace. And so if you're a female communist, I'm like, shame on you. You're the one that's making it worse for everyone. And if you don't like the system, change it. Go screw a homeless guy, you know, and stop buying things you like and start buying things you hate. That's the argument against that. So now we learn a little bit about Gini coefficients. By the way, here's why I think we need to learn about crypto, okay? Meta, the company Meta, Facebook, right? Johnson & Johnson, you heard of them?
Yes.
Visa, you heard of them?
Yes.
You heard of Berkshire Hathaway?
Not so sure.
So that's obviously Berkshire Hathaway, what's his face? Warren Buffett's company. You heard of Tesla?
Yes.
You've heard of all these companies, right? Bitcoin market cap is bigger than all of these companies individually. So Bitcoin is bigger than Berkshire Hathaway. Bitcoin is bigger than Meta. Bitcoin is bigger than Johnson & Johnson. It's bigger than Visa. It's bigger than Exxon. It's bigger than Walmart. It's bigger than JP Morgan Chase. It's bigger than Eli Lilly. It's bigger than MasterCard. That's how big Bitcoin is. So it's like if you're saying, oh, I don't want to get participated and know about it, it's like, well, imagine living in a cave where you don't know anything about Tesla, you don't know anything about Berkshire Hathaway, you don't know anything about Amazon. Actually, no, I apologize. Amazon is bigger than Bitcoin. But Bitcoin's number 14. If you were to put Bitcoin's market cap as a public company, it would be the 14th biggest company in the world.
That's nice. And still, like, regular folks are like, it's a scam.
Everything's a scam if you're stupid. That's my argument. Like, you know, like literally, if you're stupid, everything's a scam. You know, it's like, I'll give you an example. Women are like, oh, all men are jerks. It's like, why? Well, because they mistreat me, they do this, they that. All men do that to you? Like, you sound pretty stupid. And you have the same argument, guys like, oh, women are this and that. It's like, really? Why? Well, they mistreat me, they do this, they do that. It's like, so women are a scam. Like, pretty much. It's like, if you suck at something, it's always going to scam you. So it's
nice
like, right?
It's
like, get educated. And by the way, I need to say this for the Club Henry. When we talked about the Gini coefficient and how women make all the consumer decisions and basically all the decisions there are, the way I see it is that men produce and women use. Men produce, women use. So women are the ones that are making the decisions about what men to choose. Women are the ones that are making the decisions about which products to choose. Men are just producing themselves as a product, and then women choose the winners. Men produce, women choose. I needed that for the clip. That's going to be good on Instagram. All right, let's wrap it up. What's one piece of advice that you would give to people that don't know anything about crypto? They come to you and they say, Derp, Silvia, I need to learn about crypto. What should I know?
Well, at this point, I would just say, like, do your own research. Because, like, what I've seen throughout the years, like, for example, even in my Instagram, right, I'm, like, doing crypto content. People have seen me there, like, people who are not in crypto, because, like, I do dancing and modeling, so I have, like, followers from all types of different areas. And then they're like, oh, I really want to start, with crypto. And, I've heard about this Bitcoin thing. And, tell me, should I buy now? Or like, when should I buy it? Or like, what should I buy? And it's kind of like, you can't come ask me this type of question. I feel like you should you should learn the basics kind of and understand like the whole blockchain thing and like at least like some basics of the like investment and investing and all that. So like asking it from someone else and asking, of course, like you can ask like overall opinions, but like very specifically asking like, should I buy now? Or when should I sell? Or stuff like that. Or overall that they like see a news headline that like, oh, Bitcoin price is pumping. And then they're like putting their money in and like it comes crashing down and then they're like, crypto is a scam. But like it's kind of your own fault that you didn't really like take the time, invest the time to actually learn yourself, like the basics at least, to understand the market and how it works and all that. So I think like the main saying of do your own research really stands there. And I think like, and I get it's a bit hard now because you have so much information and like everyone is sharing about crypto, but you can learn the basics like anywhere from YouTube or like, I don't know, goinbase.com or go learn. And so I think, yeah.
All right. So thank you for that. And we're done.